Do not confuse the urge to leave with proof that there is nothing here for you. Sometimes you leave precisely when something has come close enough to require a decision. Chosen one, think about the last few times clarity found you. Not excitement, not fantasy, clarity. A moment when you knew a conversation had to happen, a habit had to end, an idea deserved action, or one direction simply felt clean. Then, something strange happened. The clarity did not always survive. Your attention moved. Your mind produced another question. You decided you needed one more confirmation. Maybe you told yourself, I already know this. And soon the moment that had felt undeniable became negotiable again. That is the pattern we are going to examine today. I cannot tell you that God literally sent you 4 private messages and personally told me this is number 5. But I can show you 4 moments that repeat in the lives of people who keep reaching the edge of change, then somehow return to the same place. If you recognize all 4, the 5th moment becomes different. The first is when discomfort appears and you mistake it for a reason to escape. The second is when clarity arrives, but you cannot hold it long enough to act. The third is when preparation quietly replaces movement. The fourth is more dangerous because it feels normal. You become used to a foggier and more fragmented version of yourself. There is one pattern connecting all 4. We will give that pattern a name. We will also look at why asking for a louder signal may never solve a problem that exists inside the receiver. And before this message closes, you will have a simple way to test the difference between discernment and automatic retreat. But you do not need to wait for the end to receive something useful. The next time you feel a sudden urge to leave a moment of clarity, do not immediately obey it. Notice it first. Then ask one question. What became uncomfortable 1 second before I wanted to escape? That question can reveal more than another hour of searching. Awareness creates a small gap between the feeling and the reaction. Inside that gap, you get your choice back. You do not have to force yourself to stay in every situation. You simply stop treating every impulse as an instruction. This is why the 5th knock matters. The first 4 moments may have been about the message you were trying to understand. This moment is about seeing what happens inside you after the message becomes clear. That changes the entire conversation. Maybe you have been asking why God seems silent. Maybe you have been wondering why you keep receiving insight, but your life still feels stuck. Maybe the answer is not that nothing reached you. Maybe something reached you and then disappeared somewhere between recognition and movement. If that possibility feels familiar, mark this moment with a simple sentence. I stay awake. Do not write it as a promise to me. Use it as a reminder to yourself. This time, the goal is not to collect another message. The goal is to understand why the previous ones could not stay. And that brings us to the first interruption. It is dangerous because it can feel wise. It can even feel spiritual. Most people never question it because they call it discernment. But sometimes, the urge to leave is not guidance. Sometimes, it is the exact place where the old pattern begins. The first interruption begins at the threshold. Something becomes clear enough to touch a real decision, and suddenly, your mind wants distance. You open another video. You check a message. You remember a task that seemed unimportant 5 seconds earlier. Call this the threshold escape reflex. It is the moment when discomfort appears near a truth, and your system tries to reduce that discomfort by moving away. That does not mean every uncomfortable feeling should be ignored. But discomfort alone is not always an instruction to leave. Think about how this appears. You know a boundary needs to be spoken, but suddenly you need more time. You know an application should be sent, but the timing no longer feels perfect. You know a relationship pattern is draining you, but one warm message makes you question everything again. The truth did not vanish. Your distance from it changed. This is where people become confused. They say, I lost peace, so this must be wrong. Sometimes that conclusion is wise. Sometimes it is avoidance wearing spiritual language. The difference is not found by reacting faster. It is found by becoming more observant. Notice the sequence. First, something lands, then your body reacts, then your mind produces a reason, then your attention moves. If you only notice the final thought, the reason sounds convincing. But if you notice the whole sequence, you may see that the reason arrived after the discomfort. That is why the 4 missed moments do not need to become evidence that you failed. They can become data. And when a pattern becomes visible, it becomes harder for that pattern to control you without permission. Here is a simple practice. When a decision or realization feels unusually clear, give yourself 60 seconds before escaping into more information. Just remain present long enough to notice what your mind is trying to avoid. Ask yourself, what exactly feels uncomfortable here? Maybe the answer is rejection. Maybe it is responsibility. Maybe it is grief. Maybe it is the possibility that you already know what needs to happen, and knowing means you can no longer hide behind uncertainty. A feeling can be real without being an instruction. That distinction can change how you interpret moments that once seemed confusing. You can honor your emotions without handing every emotion the steering wheel. Imagine staying with an uncomfortable truth for 1 more minute. You stop abandoning a clear decision just because your nervous system becomes noisy. You stop calling every wave of fear a warning from heaven. You create enough space to test the moment with wisdom, facts, prayer, and patience. If you are still here, you are not only looking for validation anymore. You are examining the mechanism beneath your reactions. That is the beginning of agency. But staying with the message only solves the first problem. There is a second interruption, and it happens after you understand the message perfectly. You can recognize the truth, agree with it, feel deeply moved by it, and still watch it disappear within hours. Why can clarity arrive so strongly, then fade before it becomes action? The answer leads to a gap that may explain years of repeated searching. The second interruption is quieter because it happens after the moment feels successful. You receive clarity, you understand what needs to change. Then a day passes, the emotional charge fades, and the old uncertainty returns as if nothing happened. On one day, everything feels clear. On the next day, doubt enters. Then mental clutter returns. Soon you are searching for another message or confirmation that can recreate the certainty you had before. This is the receiver gap. It is the distance between recognition, retention, decision, and action. You can be very strong at the first stage and still struggle with the others. Recognizing truth is not the same as holding it long enough to move. That distinction matters because it changes the question. Instead of asking, "Why is God not giving me an answer?" you begin asking, "What happens inside me after an answer becomes clear?" Maybe the answer becomes diluted by too much input. Maybe 10 opinions enter after one clear insight. Maybe fear reopens a decision that was already grounded. Maybe exhaustion makes everything feel uncertain again. It simply shows where the chain can break. Recognition is the first link, retention is the second, decision is the third, action is the fourth. If one link repeatedly fails, more information may only create more noise. A louder signal cannot solve a problem that begins after the signal has already been received. Another video can make you feel active while keeping you inside the same cycle. You feel movement in your mind, but your life stays in the same place. Here is a practical test. The next time you receive an insight that feels grounded, write it in one sentence. Then, write one small action that matches it. If that action is safe and reasonable, complete it before collecting more information about the same decision. Call this the 24-hour clarity capture. It is about protecting a clear insight from unnecessary dilution long enough to test it in reality. For example, if you know you need to ask one important question, send the message. If you know you need information about an application, open the form. If you know a boundary needs thought, write the first sentence. You may be thinking, I already know this. Good. Then notice what that sentence reveals. Knowing a principle is still only recognition. The question is whether the principle survives long enough to shape a decision and whether the decision survives long enough to become behavior. Clarity must move, not recklessly, not blindly, but eventually it must touch reality. Otherwise, insight becomes another experience you collect instead of a life you build. This is where the receiver becomes important. It is the condition in which you notice, hold, test, and act on what becomes clear. The state of the mind receiving an insight matters, and now the pattern becomes sharper. The first interruption pulls you away before clarity settles. The second lets clarity arrive, then allows it to evaporate before action. Both can make you believe the problem is outside you, even when part of the chain is happening inside you. But there is a third interruption. It is harder to detect because it can look disciplined, patient, and even spiritual. It lets you stay busy without moving. It gives you endless reasons to prepare, while quietly protecting you from the moment when preparation must become action. The third interruption is difficult to recognize because it often looks responsible. You tell yourself you are preparing, you are waiting for peace, you are gathering wisdom, and while all of that can be healthy, preparation becomes a hiding place when it keeps protecting you from the next honest step. You ask for another sign, you watch another message, you write another page in your journal, you wait for certainty to become perfect. Then you call the delay patience, even when the same decision has been sitting in front of you for weeks. There is a simple difference. Preparation asks, what else must I know? Readiness asks, what will I do with what I already know? That question can feel uncomfortable because it removes the shelter of endless searching. Think of Peter before he stepped from the boat. The moment did not require him to understand every wave. It required enough trust to take the next step he believed was his to take. That does not mean acting recklessly. It means there comes a point when more analysis no longer creates more clarity. You may know this pattern personally. You pray about the conversation, but never schedule it. You research the opportunity, but never submit anything. You ask whether the relationship is right, while avoiding the boundary that would reveal the answer. The preparation feels active, but nothing actually moves. This is why readiness is different. Readiness does not demand complete certainty. It asks for a grounded next step, something ethical, something reasonable, something small enough to test in reality without gambling your peace, your safety, or your future. Imagine how different your days would feel if clarity no longer had to win a courtroom trial inside your mind. You could pray, consider the facts, notice what is true, and move without demanding 14 confirmations. Your mind would become quieter, because every decision would not remain open forever. And this leads to something important. There may be another layer beneath the receiver we have been describing, not a replacement for faith, not a shortcut, around wisdom, a neurological layer that has to do with how the brain coordinates attention, clarity, and integration. Researchers and clinicians have explored how different parts of the brain work together. One product team built an approach around whole brain coordination and an auditory sequence that takes about 8 minutes a day. We will come back to that later. For now, hold one question. What if part of what you have interpreted only as a spiritual struggle also has a neurological layer? Do not answer too quickly. The point is not to reduce your spiritual life to biology. The point is to stop assuming that every difficulty has only one cause. A person can pray sincerely and still be exhausted. A person can love God and still struggle with attention. A person can be faithful and still need better support for the mind doing the receiving. So this third interruption ends with a choice. You can keep collecting preparation because it feels safe. Or you can ask whether preparation has already done its job, and whether the next faithful move is simply to begin. Because the fourth interruption is even quieter. It does not hide inside preparation. It hides inside identity. It appears when you have lived with reduced clarity for so long that you stop calling it a problem and start calling it who you are. We have reached the part that changes the meaning of the first three. The fourth interruption does not always feel like resistance. Sometimes it feels like personality. You say, I am just scattered. You say, my memory is not what it used to be. You say, I have always been this way. But have you always been this way? Think back. There may have been a younger version of you who learned quickly, noticed patterns, imagined possibilities, and became absorbed in things without forcing it. Curiosity felt natural. Your mind felt more available. Then life became louder. Responsibilities multiplied. Attention fractured. Stress became normal. None of that means you became less worthy or less intelligent. Gradual adaptation can make reduced clarity feel normal. When change happens slowly enough, you can stop comparing your current state with what once felt possible. That is the fourth interruption. You normalize the reduced self. You stop asking why the fog is there. You build routines around it. Eventually, you protect it with identity language, because identity feels safer than admitting something might be changeable. What if the fog is not your personality? What if hesitation is not your identity? What if the version of you that appears in rare flashes of sharpness is evidence that more capacity still exists? Now return to the question from the last section. What if there is also a neurological layer to this receiver problem? Spiritual language and biology do not cancel each other. Biology cannot prove a spiritual claim, and a spiritual interpretation does not remove the reality of the brain. The product materials we will examine later build their explanation around whole brain coordination. They connect that idea to research on how the two hemispheres can perform different functions while still operating as one integrated system. That claim deserves clear language, not exaggeration. A Nobel Prize does not automatically prove a commercial product. A testimony is one person's reported experience, not a guaranteed future for everyone listening. Trust grows when those distinctions stay intact. Now imagine the opposite of the reduced self. You wake with less internal noise. You recognize a thought before 5 distractions bury it. You make a grounded decision without reopening it 12 times. You notice an opportunity and take one reasonable step while the insight is still alive. Maybe you start the project. Maybe you send the application. Maybe you speak the boundary. Maybe prayer feels less like fighting through static and more like creating enough quiet to notice what you actually believe. This is not about becoming a different species of person. It is about refusing to call fragmentation destiny. You may have adapted to a reduced version of yourself so gradually that you stopped remembering there was anything to recover. And now we can close the loop from earlier. I told you there was a neurological angle to the receiver, and I waited because a solution is only useful after you understand the problem it is meant to address. The missing piece is not more information. It is the capacity to recognize, hold, decide, and move. Insight and capacity are not the same thing. You do not need a louder signal if the deeper issue is the condition of the receiver. Now, the pattern is complete. You have seen the why. Clarity can be interrupted before it settles, after it arrives, or while it waits to become action. The fifth knock is not about becoming someone who receives more signs than everyone else. It is about becoming someone who can stay present, test what is clear, and move without hiding behind endless uncertainty. That is the identity we are building. Now return to the neurological question we left open. The product materials point back to research by Dr. Roger Sperry, who received the Nobel Prize in 1981 for work involving split brain research. His work helped deepen scientific understanding of how the two hemispheres can process information differently. The creators of the product build from a simple premise. They say clearer coordination between the two hemispheres can support a more integrated mental state. Their materials describe this as whole brain activation. Before I tell you the name, consider two experiences reported in their materials. A woman from California described years of prayer, journaling, and meditation while still feeling disconnected from the clarity she wanted. After using the approach, she reported feeling clearer and more connected in daily life. A man from Texas described a different problem. His struggle was practical. Mental fog made decisions feel heavier and work feel less focused. After using the same approach, he reported clearer thinking and a stronger sense of direction. These are testimonials, not guarantees, but they show why the team built the tool around the receiver itself. The team behind the program is led by Dr. Daniel Barone, a neurologist in New York City. According to the product materials, they developed an 8-minute targeted auditory sequence designed around what they call neural sync technology. You use headphones, close your eyes, relax, and listen once a day. They call it the Genius Switch. The Genius Switch is a digital audio tool, not a meditation course and not a complicated daily routine. The creators say it is designed to support coordination across the brain through their whole brain activation approach. This is not for everyone. It is for the person who recognizes flashes of clarity and wants to explore whether a simple daily tool can support that state. It is for someone who has done spiritual work, but does not want to treat mental fog as a permanent identity. The pricing on the product page is structured to make the trial relatively low risk. The materials mention a much higher value comparison of $500. The listed price is $49. The current offer shown in the file is $39 with lifetime digital access. The purchase also includes 4 bonuses. One is a guided visualization, one is a smart grocery shopping guide, one is a classic manifestation book, one is a printable 5 habits infographic. The page also states that the purchase is covered by a money-back guarantee. That matters because you do not need to treat curiosity as commitment. You can read the information, examine the claims, and decide whether the approach fits you. The product materials also warn that the current price may increase. Do not make your decision from fear, make it from fit. The real question is whether continuing with the same pattern costs you more than trying a tool designed around the problem you now understand. One practical warning matters. The product file says the verified version is available through the official page, not through random tracks with similar names on other platforms. If you choose to investigate it, use the link in the description or the pinned comment and read the details before deciding. The tool does not replace God. The tool does not replace obedience. A clearer mind still has to choose, test, and act. What this tool may support is the condition in which that choice becomes easier to hold. And that brings us back to the 5th knock. You now know the pattern. You know where clarity can break. The next question is no longer, how many more signs do I need? The next question is, what does the 5th version of me do differently when clarity finally arrives? Before this message ends, there is one declaration I want you to make if you refuse to return to the 4 old patterns. But first, you need to see what the 5th version of you actually does differently. The 5th version does not chase more signs. The 5th version learns how to stay present when clarity arrives. The first change is simple. You stop escaping discomfort automatically. You still use wisdom. You still test what you feel. But you no longer assume that tension means stop. Sometimes tension only means that a real decision has finally reached the place where your old pattern used to take control. The second change is that you stop collecting endless confirmation. When something feels clear, grounded, ethical, and consistent, you give it room to survive. You do not bury one clean insight under 20 new opinions. You let clarity become something you can actually use. The third change is that you stop confusing preparation with movement. Research has a purpose. Prayer has a purpose. Reflection has a purpose. But there comes a point when the next answer is hidden inside action, not inside another hour of thinking. Readiness becomes real when it touches reality. The fourth change is the deepest. You stop calling reduced clarity your identity. You may have lived with fog for years. You may have normalized hesitation. You may have built your schedule around distraction. But adaptation is not destiny, and a familiar state is not always your fullest state. Here is the fifth knock response. Remember 4 words: stop, name, test, move. First, stop before you collect more information. Give the moment enough space to become visible. Second, name the clearest thing you actually know in 1 sentence. Third, test it. Ask whether it is grounded, ethical, consistent with your values, and reasonable in the real world. Do not confuse urgency with wisdom. Do not turn clarity into recklessness. A clear next step can still be small, careful, and thoughtful. Fourth, move. Take 1 reasonable action while the insight is still alive. Send the email, open the application, write the first paragraph, schedule the conversation, remove 1 distraction. Make the decision smaller if you need to, but let the decision touch reality. That is how the chain changes. Recognition becomes retention, retention becomes decision, decision becomes action, and action gives you new information that endless thinking can never provide. If the tool we discussed earlier fits what you need, the resource is in the description and the pinned comment. Read it for yourself. Examine the claims. Decide from fit, not pressure. Then come back to the larger point, because the product was never meant to become the center of this message. The center is what happens when you become harder to pull away from your own clarity. The center is the person who can remain awake at the threshold. The center is the person who no longer needs confusion to feel safe. And before we close, I want to show you what life can begin to feel like when clarity stops appearing only in flashes. Because the fifth knock is not complete when you understand the pattern. It becomes complete when a different pattern starts replacing it. Imagine waking up without immediately entering a fight with your own mind. The room is still quiet, and for a few minutes, you can actually hear 1 thought long enough to know whether it matters. That kind of clarity does not need to feel dramatic. It can feel ordinary. You notice what needs attention. You know what can wait. Your mind has more space because fewer things remain permanently unresolved. Now, imagine 1 decision that has followed you for months. You have prayed and replayed every possible outcome. In the clearer version of this moment, you do not suddenly know the future. You simply know enough to take the next grounded step. You look at the facts. You notice your values. You pray. You test what feels true. Then, you decide. The decision does not need to feel perfect before it becomes real. It only needs to be honest, responsible, and clear enough for the next move. Think about an opportunity arriving. In the old pattern, overthinking could keep you watching until the window closed. In the new pattern, you notice the opportunity, examine it, and respond while it is still available. Think about a relationship. You stop rehearsing the same conversation 40 times. You choose your words carefully, but you eventually speak them. You discover that clarity often becomes stronger after an honest action. Because reality can answer questions, imagination keeps recycling. Think about the project you keep returning to in your mind. The book, the business idea, the application, the creative work. You stop demanding a complete map before taking step 1. 1 page becomes real. 1 call gets made. 1 hour becomes protected. This is what transformation can look like. Not lightning, not constant emotional intensity. Sometimes transformation is simply clarity that survives long enough to become behavior. Now, choose one decision you have been delaying. Do not choose the biggest crisis in your life. Choose something real and manageable. Picture yourself standing in front of that decision with less mental noise than usual. See the facts clearly. Notice the fear without fighting it. Ask yourself one question: what is the next grounded step I already know enough to take? Do not ask how you can know everything. Ask what you know well enough to do next. Notice what happens in your body when the decision becomes smaller. Maybe your shoulders soften. Maybe your breathing changes. Maybe nothing dramatic happens at all. The goal is not to manufacture a feeling. The goal is to recognize the difference between endless searching and grounded readiness. You have now moved through the 4 interruptions. You have seen the escape reflex. You have seen the receiver gap. You have seen preparation become hiding. You have seen how a reduced state can slowly become identity. There is only one thing left to do. The 5th knock needs a declaration, not a prediction about what God must do next. A declaration about how you will meet the next moment of clarity when it comes. Before we close, remember this. The 4 earlier moments do not need to become a reason for shame. They can become evidence, showing where clarity faded and where an old reflex took the wheel. You do not need to punish yourself for every delay. You only need to stop protecting the pattern once you can see it clearly. Release the need for endless confirmation. Release the belief that uncertainty makes you safer. Release the habit of leaving when truth becomes uncomfortable. Release the idea that mental fog is simply who you are. And now, make this declaration slowly. I stay present when clarity arrives. I do not run just because something becomes uncomfortable. I test what I feel with wisdom, prayer, facts, and patience. I do not confuse fear with guidance. I hold what is clear. I do not bury one grounded insight beneath endless noise. I allow a decision to remain a decision when it has been tested, honestly. I move when movement is mine. I do not demand a perfect map before taking a reasonable step. I do not call preparation progress when preparation has already done its job. I let what I know become something I live. I do not call fog my identity. I do not reduce myself to the most distracted version of my mind. I remember that clarity can be supported, practiced, protected, and strengthened through the choices I make each day. I can receive clarity without worshipping certainty. I can act without pretending I know the future. I can be faithful without using faith as a reason to avoid the next honest step. And I am available for the life my clearest decisions create. Chosen one, this is the 5th moment, not because a voice from heaven gave me a secret count. It is the 5th moment because you have now seen the 4 places where your clarity can disappear, and you can no longer mistake the pattern for mystery. The first place was the threshold. Discomfort appeared, and escape looked like wisdom. The second was the receiver gap. Recognition arrived, but retention failed before action could begin. The third was preparation. Searching continued after enough had already been revealed. The fourth was identity. You adapted to a reduced state so gradually that limitation began to feel normal. But now the pattern has a name, and when a pattern has a name, you have a better chance of meeting it consciously. So if this message gave language to something you have lived, leave one sentence below. The 5th time is different. Let it mean that you will stay present long enough to test what is clear. The answer to the question we opened with is finally here. Why did the previous moments fail to stay? Maybe the signal was not the only issue. Maybe the chain broke somewhere between recognition, retention, decision, and action. This time, you know where to look. This time, you know what to test. This time, you know that awareness creates a gap, and inside that gap, you can choose differently. The 5th knock is not louder. The receiver is awake. Amen. It is sealed.